Good afternoon, everybody, from London. Good morning or good evening, wherever you are in the world. And welcome to this 1.5 hour webinar meeting in which we will be talking about the potential of the composting industry to sequester carbon in soils. And we are doing this because the composting associations of many different countries around the world came together for International Composting Awareness Week, which was early in May, to commission Dr. Jane Gilbert of Carbon Clarity of the UK to try to understand and calculate what contribution the composting industry in these countries is currently making and what contribution the industry could potentially make in sequestering carbon in soils. And of course, this is a fundamental question that we have to ask ourselves in terms of the whole debate around climate change, because we know from the 4 per thousand initiative, of which Jane will be talking, that the potential for climate change mitigation from carbon sequestration in soils is enormous and heavily overlooked. To give you an example, today I picked up the Times newspaper here in London. It talks about green growth. Nowhere in this 12-page newspaper insert did it talk about any of the subjects that we are going to be discussing today. And so it's important for the composting industry, but I think it's important for policymakers around the world to understand the potential of an industry which is already operating. Now, we have guests speaking from the UK, Compost Network, from Australia, Canada, the United States, USA, and Italy. And the study which Jane is going to present was also commissioned by the composting associations of Ireland and New Zealand. And so the data really is across a whole broad spectrum of nationalities across the world. Let me just say one thing, that when I started out working with the Compost Association of Italy in 1990, composting was considered to be a small garden activity which people in the countryside undertook. And today, as Alberto will tell us, the compost and the biogas industry of Italy is at the core, the largest single industry in resource recovery in that country. So the potential for us to grow, for us to contribute to climate change mitigation, for us to have regenerative practices with our soils, get organic carbon and topsoil back to soil is immense. And currently, we are probably just achieving some 2 to 3% of that potential today. Jane will give us now some data. Jane has been the past managing director of the Composting Association as it was in the UK many years ago, and is now a consultancy called Carbon Clarity. And Jane is going to look at the data which she has put together on the potential of carbon sequestration from composting in these selected countries. Thank you, Jane, for joining us and for doing this, and I give the floor over to you.
There we go. Okay. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Can you see my screen? Is that coming through? Excellent. Okay. I guess I'm sort of stuck with this presentation slightly, as I can either say very little or absolutely a huge amount, and finding somewhere between the two is a tad challenging. But I'll try and summarize some of this work in 10 minutes or less. First of all, just to acknowledge that the methodology that I'm just going to speak about and the numbers that I've crunched for this little bit of work all stem out of some work that was funded by ISWA. ISWA is the International Solid Waste Association, and I know a few of the speakers here today are members of ISWA and of the Working Group on Biological Treatment of Waste. And I've recently taken over as chair of that of this working group taken over from my colleague Marco Ricci Jurgensen, who is masquerading as Massimo Centomiro in this call. So this is a project that was initiated in 2018 and completed in 2020, and it was looking to quantify the benefit of putting organic matter in compost and digestate onto soils. And as David has alluded, it's been known for many, many years that putting good quality compost and organic amendments on soil will improve the functionality of the soil, its organic matter content, but by how much? And that's one of the things that these policymakers do need to know to be able to understand and to factor that in. So Marco, myself and Aditi Ramola, the technical director at ISWA, were engaged in this project for 2 years, and we published 4 reports, and they're all available on the ISWA website at the URL listed. They're freely available to download. So the background methodology for what I'm about to say is in there. Is in those reports, in particular in report number 2 and report number 4. So putting a value on compost, Marco and I estimated, based on a review and survey of composting operations and anaerobic digestion operations globally, that currently around about 83 million tonnes a year of organic matter bio-waste. So we're excluding sewage sludges, biosolids, excluding agricultural wastes and so forth, and a lot of the industrial waste. But from the municipal waste stream, around about 83 million tonnes a year is currently treated in a biological treatment facility. We know that potential is going to be somewhere around about 1,000,000, 1,000 million or 1 billion tonnes a year. And this is only going to set to grow as we're seeing an increase in population, but also more people moving into cities and urban areas from rural areas. So that's where we are. We know that all of that material of this organic waste contains carbon, but when we recycle that, what does this actually mean? Well, based upon published work, we know that a certain amount of the carbon in compost is actually set down into long-term carbon. So it's actually held up and locked up in the soil, so-called carbon sequestration. So numbers that we crunched as part of the project based on published research indicate that around about 9 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents are locked up in soil every year. So that's quite significant. But if we were to compost the whole 1 billion tonnes a year and put that onto soil, this could increase to about 98 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents every year. This is carbon that's stored in the soil, but also some of the avoided emissions associated with displacing fertilizers. So we need to just be a little careful on that, because we're not necessarily comparing like with like, but we know that manufacturing nitrogen fertilizers through Haber-Bosch process is a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So by recycling nitrogen in compost and putting it on soil, we can offset some of that. We also know that compost feeds the soil, and that's been one of the key themes that's come out of this year's Compost Awareness Week. Recycle your organics, feed your soil, compost. And we know in this 83 million tonnes of organic material, by composting it and putting it onto soil, we've got about 1 million tonnes of NP and K, nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium going onto soil every year in total. So these are total quantities, not just plant and crop ready, crop soluble. And that has potential to increase to about 12 million tonnes, which can then go back into the cycle to grow more food for us. So that's just putting a value on compost at the moment. Looking specifically at climate change, we know that by storing carbon in soil, we are locking it up and sequestering it. So looking at that 83 million previously, we're doing about 5 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents going into soil just from the carbon. That has potential to increase to 55 million tonnes if we include the 1 billion tonnes of municipal organics. just looking at avoided fertilizer emissions in manufacturing and extracting the fertilizers, that works out at about 4 million tonnes a year, with potential to increase to 43 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents annually. And when we put this into a greenhouse gas converter, and the Environmental Protection Agency in the USA has got a very nice little online calculator that you can use, and it will express equivalents in a whole range of different manners. So that 5 million can work out at something like 608 billion smartphone chargers, which is significantly more than the total number of smartphones currently in circulation. Or it will offset the kilometres driven by a car from 36 billion, with a potential of 396 billion. And 36 billion is something like about 90,000 trips to the moon and back. So we're talking very significant amounts here when we try to contextualize this. Just looking how this contributes towards the 4 per thousand goal. This is an initiative that was set up by the French Environment Agency in line with the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. And they calculated that if we could increase total organic carbon stocks in soils by 0.4%, we're actually going to offset a significant amount of the anthropogenic carbon dioxide being emitted every year. So increasing soil organic carbon stocks by 0.4% has significant potential. So looking at the calculations that we've done, this would translate to about 5.2 tonnes per hectare going onto soil to increase the carbon stock of that soil by 0.4%. Out of all the compost that has been produced out of this 83 billion tonnes of carbon, this is going to go onto 96 million hectares of land, or equivalent of 6% of global cropland. So what this is showing is that actually by putting carbon onto soil and putting it specifically onto cropland, we can actually go a long way towards meeting the 4 per thousand goal. So just put those figures in just to illustrate sort of some big macro, big level, high level figures, just for comparison. And finally, all the people around the table here today: Canada, USA, Republic of Ireland, the UK, Germany, because we had European Compost Network involved as well, Italy, Australia and New Zealand. I did a few calculations based upon the amount of organic waste they're producing, looking at their potential and making assumptions about the different potential sequestration rates that are likely to happen in those different countries as they've got different climates, etc. And as you can see currently, in terms of the composting sectors, each of those are sequestering different amounts in terms of thousands of tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents every year. With the USA, as it is such a large country, sequestering over 1,000 tonnes, so 1 million tonnes of CO2 equivalents every year. So that's just a snapshot to show that actually different countries are doing some really good work. Out of these 8 different countries, there are over almost 5,000 composting facilities, and with about 10 million tonnes per annum going on to agriculture out of the 33 million tonnes of compost produced. So it's going to show that we've still only got about a third directly going onto agricultural land where crops are being produced for human foodstuffs. In terms of carbon sequestration, total from these countries is about 2.7 million tonnes of CO2 equivalents. But the potential based upon estimates by these different composting organisations is about 8 million tonnes per annum. So once again, very significant just from these 8 countries that we're looking at. Looking very specifically at plant nutrients, by far the largest amount is total nitrogen, at about 351,000 tonnes of nitrogen nutrient every year being recycled, and smaller amounts for potassium and phosphorus. But these figures, when we actually convert them into equivalent figures in millions of monetary value, we can see that these are very significant. So looking at Europe in particular, that's over 500 million euros worth of nutrients that are being recycled to soil every year. It's about 400,000 in the UK in pounds sterling, Australian dollars 800, New Zealand dollars 859, Canada 757, and US dollars 577. So the actual price put on the nutrients and the total amount of nutrients, not just those that are crop available, but those that are going into soil, is absolutely significant. So hopefully this has given you a bit of a snapshot of just what's going on. I realise that some of the assumptions and the calculations are a little complex, but if you look at report 2 and report 4 of the ISWA reports, that will set out the background to this, and all I've done is apply it to these different countries. So I hope this has given you a bit of an overview of compost's potential, and I guess the next speakers are going to go in and tell us all a bit more about what's going on in each of these 8 different countries. So thanks very much. I hope I haven't overrun time-wise, and any questions, then please just come back and get in touch with me as need be.
Thanks, Jane. I have just one comment and one question for you. One comment, with the carbon price currently in the EU at $50, 50 euro a tonne, and the carbon price in the UK at £50 a tonne, that carbon sequestered in soil today is worth, in terms of carbon credits, $130 odd million. I just quickly calculated. But of course, whilst we're having huge incentives going to industries all over the place to go green, zero of this goes to the compost industry.
Absolutely. And if you look at the ISWA report, report 4, we actually did use those calculations, and you're right, I think we used something like 54 euros per tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent sequestered, based on World Bank report published a few years ago, which, like you say, David, is broadly in line with what's the current rates at the moment. So we've done some calculations, and we're talking for each tonne of compost fresh mass somewhere in the region of about 7-8 euros, just based on the carbon sequestration value, and then about another 2/3 of that, about twice the amount of that in nutrient terms. So overall, in euros, we're probably talking about 20 to 25 euros per wet tonne of compost, based on its carbon sequestration value and the nutrients contained in it. But yes, we've done some of that. We've done some discounted cash flow analysis over 10 and 20-year periods and discounted that back. And the numbers do look very positive. But as you quite rightly say, the composting industry is not benefiting from that at the moment, and it should be, without a doubt.
Yes, exactly. Just one last question, and I think perhaps maybe one of the other speakers will touch upon this, is in your calculations you have made you've taken no account, and deliberately so, for the avoided emissions of, for example, methane going to methane from landfill, of bio-waste going to landfill. But presumably, in terms of avoided emissions, they would presumably be even greater than the carbon emissions, the carbon sequestration to soil.
Yes, absolutely. And I think Susan might touch on that. I'm not sure. I don't want to drop her into that. But yes, there are. Yes, without a doubt, one of the issues we've got is that it depends, obviously, how organics are being managed in different parts of the world. So just dumping into non-sanitary, non-engineered dump sites, of course, will have the greatest methane emissions and potentially black carbon if it's starting to be burnt as well. Putting it into sanitary landfill and or incineration will obviously have different effects there. One of the other problems that we do have is for life cycle assessments, where the timescales for the boundaries are often set at 100 years. Now, we cannot say for the carbon sequestered in soil that once it's in there, it's going to stay for 100 years, because that very much depends upon how that soil is managed and what else is being put on the soil, etc. etc. It's much more of a live issue. But 100 years, normally it means that when it comes to LCA techniques, that compost and sequestration in soil isn't effectively considered, which does mean that it doesn't compare with other techniques where much smaller timeframes are things can be measured in that way. So it's an important issue. All I would stress is that 2030 is only 8.5 years away, and 2050 net zero is only 28.5 years away. So a 100-year time frame to me doesn't make sense at the moment. We need to be thinking about what we can do now and what's going to have effect now, and putting compost quality assured, low contaminant compost onto soil is one of the quick wins.
Absolutely, yeah. No time to lose. Thanks, Jane. That really good overview. And again, thanks for doing that study for us all.
You're welcome.
And stay around, because there may be other questions. Now, Massimo Centemero, who is the deputy or the vice president of the European Compost Network, was going to join us. Cannot, but he has an absolutely excellent substitution in Marco Ricci, who, as Jane has just said, was also the previous chair of the Biological Working Group in the International Solid Waste Association. Marco Ricci is also within the European Compost Network, and Marco is going to talk to us here about a wider European perspective. And particularly, Marco, I want you to focus for the audience on how you think the industry is going to play out over the next few years with all this new food waste coming from obligatory food waste collections post 2023. Marco, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon to all of those of you who are connected to us today. Let me briefly give an answer to David's questions by a few slides. First of all, European Compost Network is representing basically the industrial sector which is aiming to recycle organic resources of feedstock by composting and anaerobic digestion. And actually it's members from all European countries. And so it's representing an important sector in this sense. Jane, as David said before, we know that Europe has ambitious commitments, for example, reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, which means less than 10 years, by 55%. And this commitment of Europe, of the European Union, impacted and will impact also in our sector. It has been translated, for example, and it's the first time in European legislation, into mandate for member states to introduce a separate collection of biowaste by 2023. Well, translated into practice, this means that in those countries, and there are a number of them, European countries where biowaste is collected, I think that additional resources will be collected by tackling food waste, especially in cities, which in some countries is still, let's say, missing element of a supply chain for composting and anaerobic digestion facilities. In other European regions or countries where the separate collection has not been established yet, I think it will definitely focus both on garden and park, but again, specifically on food waste. Let me stress the fact that other think tanks and also like the LMA Foundation have pointed out in the recent years that we need to tackle the food issue in towns and cities to make ourselves sustainable medium period. So for sure, this mandatory collection and of course will is demanding a lot of commitment from our sector. Just to share a few numbers, and partially they have been anticipated by Jane Gill before me, composting and anaerobic digestion from organic or from waste, as is named in Europe, is a mature technology and industry in Europe. Here there are some key numbers about the numbers of facilities which are installed according to ECN status report of last year. As you can see, anaerobic digestion is gaining momentum. It's a more recent technology, but it is applied more and more often throughout Europe. If you're curious, you can find the ECN website and report more details focusing on single European countries. I'm not into the detail about that. It's not the numbers of facilities which make the difference. More than that, if we focus on 4 countries taken out of the whole 27, which are advanced both in recycling, well, these countries are also advanced in collecting bio-waste separately and send it to recycling. And again, all these 4 countries have still some possibility to improve and to ameliorate their amounts collected. And I chose to show 2 countries, Germany and Italy. Well, Germany is the countries collecting most of the organic waste, of course, also because it's the largest country. Italy is the country which is more effective in collecting food waste in towns and cities. Well, in both cases, you can see that composting and gas are having their share of treatment capacity, and in the last years, for sure, AD or anaerobic digestion is, as I said before, more and more important, especially if it has to recycle food waste. Again, I'm not going into detail, but this is a focus, very important. We know that both outputs, solid outputs from composting, from oil digestion, can be different in terms of composition, and so they have different properties. Compost is an organic soil improver, so it ameliorates the structure, the physical and chemical characteristics of a soil. Digestates, according to its composition, has more the properties of organic fertilizers. So the fertilizing properties are really and easily available for plants uptake. Those of you who want to go more in detail about issues, there are a number of fact sheets published by the European Compost Network, and there is also a comprehensive overview done in one of the ISVA reports, which was by Jane Gilbert, me, and other contributors. Again, it's very important to stress that compost and digestate are products are ready and which have significant amounts of fertilizers which can replace those which are produced artificially and with an energy demand and consequently CO2 emissions. At the same time, compost, especially compost, is a tool to and restore organic matter on soil. And if we start from typical application rates for European soils of 30 tons of fresh compost per hectare, well, you add to 9 tons of organic matter to that soil. Which means, in other words, that there is a lot of discussion, at least in Europe, about carbon storage technology. And we know that some are under development, addressing also other industrial facilities. It's worth pointing out that compost, and to a minor extent anaerobic digestate, is a product which is readily available and which can be very easily used as a carbon storage technology. You just have to bring it back to soils. And I'm not, again, to show you the details about the unitary numbers, but it's worth showing how our sector can contribute to a European commitment about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or to the Green Deal, which aims Europe to become carbon neutral by 2050. Well, if we look at the roughly 50 million tons of biowaste, which is currently collected and recycled at composting and ID facilities, we see that we are able to store roughly 1.3 million tons of CO2 equivalents. which are somehow equivalent to roughly 300 turbines, which producing energy for 1 year. We know that Europe has still a significant, in our sector, has still to grow significantly. And if we imagine to be able to intercept and transform the 130 million tons which are potentially there in Europe and turn hypothetically just into compost, well, we know that we'll be able to multiply by a factor 3 the amounts of tons of CO2 which could be stored thanks to soil carbon sequestration in a relatively approach. And coming to the end, and I just want to underline the fact that at the time, at the current moment, most of the European compost market is focusing on selling the compost in bulk directly to agricultures or to farms, while there are other market sectors for more, let's say, value products and uses. If you want, if the participants are curious to know more about that, we would like to invite you to look or to Google at our information campaigns. One is the Safe Organics in Spain, which has been launched at the European level to get a EU policy response on translating this new strategy in a consistent soil strategy for Europe in order to preserve our soils in the medium term. Last but not least, since we are speakers from all over the world, if you would like to spot what compost, to some extent AD is doing around Europe, well, here are the links to the very recent International Compost Week, where a number of experiences about production and use are shown at the European. Last but not least, further information can be found on SOS Soil. If you're about growing media, so the value of digestate and compost in soil, visit the international conference, which will be in summer this year, Growing Media Conference 2021, and of course, our website at ECN. We would warmly welcome you to feedback to us. Thank you very much.
Marco, thank you. And I hope you will share those slides with us all afterwards so that we can distribute them. Now, I have one question for you, Marco, and that is, as the amount of food waste which we are collecting in the EU at the moment is still very small. I think the report last year from the BIC and Zero Waste Europe showed that we are collecting some 16% of household food waste across the EU, and half of that in your country, in Italy, and Alberto will talk about that later. Now, the concern is from many that as we go towards greater household food waste collections, so we will go away from clean streams, which are coming at the moment from garden waste and coming from industrial and commercial waste, to very dirty and contaminated streams coming from households. How do we avoid this?
Well, we avoid this in two. First of all, learning to collect food waste with the correct tools, which means for compostable liners, paper or bioplastics, but please no traditional plastics. And second, learning to choose the right collection schemes which make waste producers responsible. So curbside collections are fine, bring schemes are basically critical. And third, we need to rely on information campaigns to households, feedback mechanism, and again, curbside collection, which make the waste producer responsible and the waste collector, which has been normally tendered to do the service, responsible. Well, it's that even in critical areas like Milan is a metropolitan area with basically everybody living in flats, we, the Italians, are able to collect food waste of high quality, which is fully compatible both with anaerobic digestion with industrial composting.
Thank you, Marco. And one good bit of news maybe for the audience who didn't pick it up, but the European Parliament voted just a few days ago for a legally binding European soil directive for the Commission to now write and to negotiate over the next years, which will again, hopefully create those marketplaces and those uses for compost going forward in terms of regenerative agriculture and regenerating topsoils. Thank you, Marcus. Stay with us, please, in case there are other questions.
Okay.
And now, it's very late at night in Australia, and it's a great pleasure for us to be able to welcome Peter Oler, who is the National Executive Officer of the Australian Organics Recycling Association. Australia, a huge country with a relatively small population, but with a lot of very exciting new initiatives going on in the urban centres. And we're seeing a lot of growth of organic waste collections and organic treatment. And Peter, the floor is yours to tell us about Down Under. Peter, at present we can't hear you. We can see your slide, but we cannot hear you. Perhaps you have to unmute.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you now, Peter, yeah.
Apologies there, for some reason my microphone actually disconnected at this end.
That's all right. You want to go on to full screen with your presentation? It's only on half screen at the moment.
Let me do that. Is that on full screen now?
It's coming. There we go. The floor's yours, mate.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. Thank you to my fellow presenters from around the world. And good afternoon to our audience in Italy and elsewhere from Australia. I'm Peter Oler, the National Executive Officer of AORA, the Australian Organics Recycling Association. We're the national body for the organics recycling industry across the country. And we include, as well as the organic recyclers, those up and down the supply chain. So suppliers of equipment and feedstock, representatives of the end users, the purchasers and end users of the products, government agencies involved in the sector, academics and others, and universities as well who are involved in research for the sector. I'm not going to sit here and give you a bunch of data about the values of applying organic inputs to Australian soils. You've seen the headline figure in the earlier presentation from Jane, 453,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent per annum. We think that's a really significant underestimation, but in truth, we don't have at this stage a reliable national figure to capture it. What we do know is Australia is a challenged and challenging land of extremes. We have generally poor quality soils. We have soils that have been degraded through 150 years of agriculture in some places. We have issues with significant endemic drought and floods interspersed between the droughts. We have issues around soil salinity and pests. So a lot of challenges in terms of managing Australian soils, and therefore the capacity of organic additives to add value in a whole bunch of ways is really important. In Australia, organics make up more than half our national waste stream, and therefore more than half of what is going to landfill. In order to meet national and state targets around things like waste and landfill reduction, around things like carbon reduction and sequestration, around things like drought resilience, agricultural productivity and others, in each of these areas, getting the right composts and right mulches onto soils are a vital component of achieving these national and state targets. So AORA is a national industry body. Like most national industry bodies, the last year has been a challenge. We haven't been able to do the things that we would normally like to do, especially in terms of getting face-to-face with our members. So we've all become used to Zoom, and we certainly have in Australia. We have, however, used this time to deliver 4 foundational pieces of work to reposition AORA and our industry for a much bigger, greater, more ambitious future. The four of those are a new strategic plan for AORA as an organisation, an industry contribution study, which was published just over a year ago, an industry capacity study published slightly earlier this year, and a 10-year industry roadmap. And I want to talk to you about each of the three of those that gives you a context of where the carbon contribution and the broader environmental contribution of recycled organics in Australia is likely to go over the next 5 and 10 years. I won't focus too much on the objectives under our new strategic plan, other than to say that they are unashamedly to create an environment where more organics get recycled. There is less organic product going to landfill and more going in a refined form onto land. The first of the pieces of work we undertook was the economic contribution study. Despite its name, it looked at both the economic and environmental contribution of our industry. 2 years ago, which is the last full set of figures, Australia produced just over 14.5 million tonnes of organic waste, of which about 5.6 million tonnes went to landfill, 7.5 was recycled, and 1.5 million was recovered as energy. Our national organics recycling rate was 51.5%, but that is deceptive. We are a federation, and most of the infrastructure, the policy in this space is at a state level. And as a result, you've got massive differences in performance between different states and territories of Australia. Our best performing state, South Australia, 2 years ago was recycling at nearly 80%, and our worst, the Northern Territory, at under 20%. I won't go through these in detail, but in simple terms, there is a very significant economic contribution, both direct and indirect, from the Australian organics recycling industry. And it is consistently high in terms of its capacity to contribute in an even way across communities. It has an effect right across communities rather than in hotspots, which is important, especially when in most of our countries, we have some communities that are economically depressed compared to others. Importantly, the livelihood we pay is well above the Australian average wage. This is the environmental contribution simplified as of 2 years ago. Now, this is not the contribution from the application to soil. This is the contribution from removing organics from the waste stream and recycling them into a usable compost or mulch product. And from that process, the greenhouse gas savings equate to 3.8 million CO2 equivalent each year, which is about the same as planting 5.7 million trees or taking near enough 880,000 cars off the road each year. So that's the current process contribution for diversion from landfill and processing into organic products. I mentioned earlier that there's a huge difference in performance between our states and territories, of which we have 8, and you can see it there. Now, the one rider I would put to you is these figures are 2 years old. There's been organic growth, sorry for the bad pun, pretty significantly in a couple of states, most notably New South Wales. And over the last year, the industry has experienced a boom in virtually every state and territory, both in terms of supply of feedstock and demand for the end product. And as a consequence, the figures now compared to these nearly 2-year-old figures will be significantly higher in most places. Now, in our report around the contribution, we also did some modelling, some what-if modelling. So what if we took that national average of 51.5% recycling of organics and the widely scattered state and territory recycling figures and raised them all to an even 70, 80, 90 or 95%. And this is the highest of those scenarios. At 95%, effectively the economic contributions nationally nearly double. And in the weaker performing states currently, some of which are quite large states, you can have a trebling or more of the economic contribution. And that's reflected also in the environmental contribution, which would be uplifted by roughly double nationally and significantly more in those states that are coming from a low base. So there's a lot of good stuff left on the shelf at the current level of recycling of organics in Australia. And of course, we ask the question, what do we need to get to that? Well, what are the core things we need to deliver that economic and environmental good to Australia, but also the growth and the profitability to our industry that would come alongside? And we only need two things in this growth equation. We need the right policy settings, largely decided by government. And from the industry, we need the capacity to take up the opportunities. If you have both of those simultaneously and aligned, you will achieve those huge benefits we talked about. So our second study was about the capacity of the industry, the second part of that equation. And this is the study that we published earlier this year in January. It breaks out the feedstock sources and content, and you'll note that most of our feedstock sources, both councils and commercial contracts, are overwhelmingly metropolitan sources. What we don't do well is organics recycling, green recycling generally outside our metropolitan areas, which has a reflection in both the sources and the content. And you can see the largest content for feedstock is garden organics, and that's largely urban gardens. It's also reflected in both the products sold and the end user markets. The largest proportion of our products are composts or soils and soil blends, with various mulches making up roughly 11%. But the biggest end user market in Australia is in agriculture. Agriculture is only about a quarter of the end use market. The largest end user market is, in fact, urban amenity. There's two major reasons for that. Obviously, recycled organics, both in terms of input stock and output product, do best with relatively short supply chains. And if almost all your feedstock is coming from urban markets, then it's easier and more economically and environmentally friendly to sell your end product into those same markets. The second issue, of course, is that those parts of agriculture that would do best with application of these products often are the least able to afford it. So there's a structural issue about how we get the product to the highest and best use on ag land, especially when that agricultural land is distressed or has cash flow problems attached to the business. And there's some responses that were coming up there as well. We ask our members about what the obstacles are to their internal growth. I won't go through this in detail other than to say, if you have a look at the red on each of these rows on the right, invariably those issues that are reported as obstacles to growth relate to government. They are government decisions, government policy, government regulation, government approvals, licensing, and so on. What are not generally obstacles to growth are internal factors such as access to finance, access to labour, and skills. This says the industry has capacity. What's stopping it from fulfilling that capacity is government policy and decision making. I mentioned earlier that we modelled the 70, 80, 90 and 95% recycling rates up from 51.5%. This shows the current capacity of the industry in different states and territories in Australia to get to those levels. And you can see the challenge we face. The challenge is that the best developed parts of our industry, the best developed geographic parts, can get to 95% right now. Our two largest states in New South Wales and Victoria are halfway. They can get some of the way there, but then have capacity problems. And then there's a whole bunch of other areas that can't get anywhere near even 70% based on current capacity. So that's our challenge. Not only do we have a capacity issue, there's real granularity about how that issue shows up. A quick overview. Businesses in the industry currently occupy less than half their sites. You remove those government obstacles, they'd occupy nearly 3/4 of their sites. To achieve that 95% national recycling rate that we modelled, the industry would have to take on and process nearly 85% more organic material than it currently does. On current capacity as of 2 years ago, it can do 51% more. But as I said, we've had a boom over the last year. So a lot of that 51% capacity has actually been taken up over that last year. What these figures do show, though, is there's capacity in the industry, but there's also a need for significant new investment. And importantly, our existing businesses say that were the government obstacles, the shackles taken off in terms of policy and decision making, they'd invest 9.3 million per site, per operational site over the next 5 years with those obstacles removed. So again, the industry is ready to push the button in terms of investment, employment and growth if government comes to the table. So that brings us to the key question we've been asking ourselves, which is, how do we get to 80% recycling of organics by 2026 and 95% by 2031? Our government target, publicly announced last year, is 80% by 2030. We've chosen as an industry to bring that forward by 4 years. And we have then also decided to punch through that and get to 95% by 2031, 10 years from now. 95% for us is effectively 100% capture because there's a hard margin that for various reasons won't be able to be recycled, and we have to be treated in different ways, including some very hard margin that may still have to go to landfill. So we've made a number of recommendations to government about the inputs and what needs to happen. A lot of it is about creating alignment between government strategy, government objectives, and decision-making, and aligning the industry's decision-making to that as well. So we've done that for inputs, we've done it for the industry, and covered more than just the industry. We talk about land use and town planning, infrastructure planning and funding, and other things needed to support the sort of growth we're talking about. And we are also talking, importantly, about linking the distribution of the end product to things like national soil improvement and drought mitigation strategies to overcome that structural issue where those that would benefit most in an ag setting from our industry's products may be least able to afford it at the point when they need it. So we're looking at government strategies and financial interventions to overcome that weakness. We are getting some results. Our federal budget was handed down last week, and there's a bunch of stuff. Traditionally, the federal government in Australia hasn't been involved in this policy space at all. It's all been done by state governments and local government. For the first time after our advocacy, the federal government has weighed in. The federal budget included 67 million for a food waste for healthy soils fund, which will roll out significant FOGO initiatives nationally. That's food, organic and garden organic waste. That would see the diversion of an extra 3.4 million tonnes of organics from landfill. There's an extra 5 million for businesses, small businesses, to adopt the recycling label in Australia. Another 6 million roughly for industry-led product stewardship. For the first time, we'll have product stewardship in organics in a formal sense. The new national soil strategy, which deals with many of those issues I mentioned earlier, has been announced, and nearly $200 million Australian has been allocated to that in the first 4 years. Can
you come to some conclusion?
Yes, of course. I'll finish up now. So comes to those three overarching goals. For those who are not sure about the currency, there's a conversion factor there at the bottom. So we have big plans, good stuff happening. We are working on developing a carbon credits scheme for the industry to start rolling out from later this year. The first stage will capture carbon credits for diversion from landfill and processing. The second stage will capture carbon credits for application to agricultural soil. And the third stage will capture carbon credits from elsewhere in the supply chain. So we're looking at each of those factors. The first stage is the priority because we have significant growth coming up in the industry, and we want to get in front of that with a carbon credits capture mechanism to top up the cash flow of our industry as they grow. Sorry that I've run a little over time there, but thank you all for your time. I'd like to thank, as always, our sponsors who make all this work possible. My contact details are there, and I'm happy to have you contact me offline, and I'll do my best to answer any questions you may have.
Peter, thanks a lot, and I'm sorry to close you down. But
Not at all.
you could, I could listen to you. You know, I grew up in Australia, so I could listen to you talk about Australia till the cows come home. But I'm sorry, we're time restricted. What is very encouraging to see about your presentation is that money. I mean, people aren't throwing it away, but money is not the critical barrier, and that's really important to see that we're in a situation today where companies are willing to invest, provided the legislative frameworks, the policy frameworks are right. And I think that this is probably a common circumstance across our nations, and that is very encouraging to see. And compliments on the work that you're doing there in Australia.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Now stay with us. I'm going to now invite Susan Antler, my old friend from the Composting Council of Canada, who's going to tell us about the Canadian experience. And Susan, welcome back to our webinar. It's nice to see you again. Peter, could you put your mic on mute for me, please?
Certainly, I've just got a dead mouse. Give me 1 minute.
Better a dead mouse than a live one, I think. But Susan, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Hi, thanks very much, David, and hello from Little Italy in Toronto. Our office is right beside a fabulous, thriving community that showcases what people can do when they come together. In terms of the love of community also reflects the work that our organics recycling advocates are doing across the country in terms of focusing on the love of compost and the transformation of organic residuals back to the soil. It has been a difficult road. It's been a road that has not been given the respect that it's due. We're a country that is wide in length. The population is primarily about 100 kilometers from the US-Canada border. That's where the vast majority of folks live. But from a perspective of our constitution, waste management is a provincial territorial jurisdiction versus a national focus. And so for our organization to walk across the country and involve compost advocates and folks that are concerned about the soil reflects the fact that the science is a science, and it doesn't matter where we are, whether we're in Canada or Australia or in the UK. Anywhere. The microbes are workers, and our job is to make them happy and let them get their job done. So in recent months, you can go to our website and find out all the details about our various jurisdictions and the work that's being done. Basically, the number in our recent survey is that we have about 317 facilities. We're processing 5.3 million tons of organics every year. That's pretty phenomenal. We just last week celebrated our 30th anniversary as an organization. And when we did our first survey in 92-93, that 5.3 million tons was really only 275,000 tons. So in terms of the advancement of the industry is a reflection not so much on government policy, but individuals, whether they're a municipality or a private sector folks who decided on their own steam to move organics recycling forward. We've had great success from two provinces, Nova Scotia and PEI, who have focused on organics recycling as a priority. But to date, that kind of fervent commitment across the country has really been fueled by individual commitment. In terms of, as we started our journey to organics recycling, it was primarily a focus on composting the easier feedstocks such as leaf and yard waste. Now we have a vibrant composting technology that goes from either backyard to mid-scale to large scale on different fronts. Many of the suppliers coming from the countries that are part of this conversation. We've also expanded into anaerobic digestion, taking more difficult feedstocks such as fats, oils, and grease, animal manure, and that has also been helped through the expertise internationally. We're very fortunate to have had the support of ISWA, Jane, Marco, Aditi to go ahead and take the hard work and the much deliberations to take the numbers that they looked at and convert them into Canadian focus. And so right now, we're only at a third of our potential. It's pretty significant. It's easy. It's the low-hanging fruit in terms of carbon sequestration, carbon management. At the same time, it has been barely recognized by our governments. So this is where we are in Toronto. This is basically the heart of things in terms of curbside. For the most part, the residential organics are being picked up much more and sent to an organics recycling facility than are the IC&I, which the industrial commercial waste. That represents about 2/3 of the waste stream. So we have a long way to go. And where we're held back is the fact that landfill costs are very inexpensive still in Canada. So the organics recycling facilities either are buoyed up through government policies such as green energy, which is happening with the anaerobic digestion facilities, or a commitment from the municipality from a waste diversion perspective. As a council, we're pushing further and further away from a landfill diversion message to getting everyone to recognize that the work that each of us do, whether it's putting the organics in the green bin or in the backyard compost bin, is our way to improve the soil health and to feed the critters of the soil who do a phenomenal job to feed us. Recently, we celebrated International Compost Awareness Week, and we're really trying to push the message in terms of storing carbon. We had a celebration at a local church in Toronto where we were able to spread 25 yards of compost, which represented, thanks to ISWA, Jane Gilbert, helping us out, almost, I think it was about 25,000 kilometers that one simple action allowed us to offset. And so that's one of our messages that we're going to go out further and further. We cannot wait for government to figure this out for us. We've decided to step up and start talking about it, and eventually this will become policy. At the same time, good betting, folks, you don't put all your eggs in one basket, and the goodness of organics recycling is such that we have stories, whether it's landfill diversion, water conservation, climate change, and now through a study that we took 5 years to do in Manitoba, we have a very exciting study and results saying that the application of compost on the soil year over year provides not only extra yield, but better nutritional value of the product. And so we're pretty excited about this because at this point, government hasn't found religion in terms of carbon sequestration, and they haven't found they haven't had that fervent belief in compost yet. And so we have to make sure our messages go beyond just one aspect, and we have to get away from a landfill message, because one of the issues is if we're talking and comparing ourselves as a landfill diversion alternative, then people do not respect the simple act of putting the organics in the right bin and making sure nothing else other than organics goes into the composting facility or the anaerobic digestion facility, because all these products are going back to the soil. So whether it's backyard, on-site, or large scale, organics recycling has a role in Canadian society. We just haven't gotten to the point where we're fully understood. That's why we're very pleased that we have a partnership with our fellow organics recycling associates across the world. We've signed on to the European Compost Network's SOS program, as well as the 4 per 1,000 program. Again, the issue is that we have to band together. We have to tell this message, and we have to be tireless about it, and have to say it in so many avenues that eventually someone else will come up with the idea that compost is good for the soil. We also want to applaud ISWA. These documents are monumental to us in Canada, and we very much want to commend Jane and Marco, Aditi, as well as ISWA unto itself, and thank them enormously. These are super great documents that we're using, and it's very important as we move things forward, because inevitably, as people get more and more attuned, and money is starting to head into our area, and so quite honestly, a lot of people become more interested in a cause when money is involved. We need to be consistent with other organizations and other thinking in terms of common values, in terms of what we're able to deliver. So we very much are tying ourselves into ISWA and the hard work that has been done by that organization. Just to let you know, there's policies in terms of renewable energy, and I just wanted to get the message out, not to go into all of this, but the capacity of organics recycling, again, is only 1/3 of the potential. So if those in the audience are looking at it, we're almost at capacity in terms of the existing infrastructure. There's opportunity to come to Canada and to invest in Canada. It's not a quick win, but there is money out there, and certainly in terms of renewable energy, there's dollars at the table. And so we'd be pleased to provide you with information if you so want. Ontario is one of our provinces. It's the largest population. On July 1st, they're going to be extending the support for anaerobic digestion on farm to allow municipal source separated organics to come on farm with different rules other than what off-farm anaerobic digestion and composting facilities have to adhere to, but that will increase the number of facilities available to process organics in Ontario. Food waste is a big issue in Canada. The dollars are starting to head towards how do we reduce it. We as the council believe that it should be reduced to the maximum, and if there's any left over, then it should be recycled in the appropriate organics recycling facility versus being buried into the landfill. What's very exciting is that there's some amazing people at Agri-Food and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada right now that have a vision. They're putting together some programs that are really far reaching. And one of them is that they're going to have something called a living lab in every province. And it's going to be focused on how do we sequester carbon. And so we're getting involved with local, provincial programs. This is a multi-year. The program will, the submissions are coming in June 10th. And if you're successful, you'll be given feed money of about $100,000 for the longer term of $1 million a year. We've been working with farmers and agriculture in terms of moving forward. And what's very exciting, the picture on the right is our farm that on Friday will be getting compost. This is a commitment from landowners in a small town in Ontario, where this land will be permanently agriculture to allow for us to document carbon change in the soil, moving from conventional farming to regenerative agriculture. And so we will have 5 different test strips in terms of using different types of compost, whether it's the traditional or it's eco-teas or it's putting in the furrows to go ahead and analyze the opportunity to sequester carbon in long term and have data. So these are just some slides to show you that we're really focused on the soil. Our facilities have to do things right. They have to know what they're doing. They have to have credibility within their community. It's for us to capture the long-term potential of trust, of consumer trust. And ultimately, it's the consumer that will decide. It will be the consumer that will change the political life in our country to prioritize organics. The Achilles heel for our industry is the items that go into the green bin that are not organics. One of the biggest issues is plastic. There's a commitment from our government in terms of zero waste plastic by 2030. We're excited about that. We believe in certified compostables. We value the work that's been done by Italy in terms of the infrastructure that's been developed, and we certainly are very much appreciative of having both BASF and Novamont as members of our council. So ultimately, it's all about what you individually believe in. Every time you decide whether that organic material is going to go to your to the landfill or to the green bin, and regardless of language, it's not just about us. It's about us returning the organics back to the soil to do good on so many fronts.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. A passionate presentation, but also one full of information, and also so wonderful to see after all these years that the industry has really taken off there, and that it's really getting not enough, but some of the recognition that it deserves, and your very hard work over these last years absolutely merits. I'm delighted about that. Interesting to see that you also are suffering the same problem that many. Excuse the banging here. I live near a building site. But the contamination issues you have around plastic, we have to get that sorted out, and we're working. My initiative works at a European level, but I know Alberta will talk about that for Italy. That's really a critical problem. We can't be putting plastics to soil. So, Susan, please stay with us. We're running a bit out of time. We're running over, but we have three more speakers, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to go from North America to the USA, United States of America, where Frank Franciosi from the US Compost Council is going to talk to us about the initiatives there. I'm really excited to see some of the things you've been putting out on your website and on your media, Frank, in the last few weeks about how the new administration is looking at your industry. Tell us about it.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. First of all, I appreciate you inviting me and the opportunity to speak at this event. And much like what Peter talked about in Australia, the US is very similar. I'm not going to be talking too much about this carbon sequestration part about it. The potential is definitely probably one of the largest potentials in the world. But talking more about the obstacles and things that are in play in the U.S. and things that are positive in the U.S. that we have seen that we haven't seen really in the last 20 years. The U.S. Composting Council has been around for over 30 years now, and our mission very much is to support the industry, to grow the industry, and then also to support compost manufacturing and compost use. We believe that doing so, we obviously have a healthy soil, which is giving us better clean air, better water, a stable climate, and eventually a sustainable society. So what's driving compost in the U.S.? There's a lot of different factors. I'll try to go through each and every one of these as quickly as possible. Internationally, as you know, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN has got some goals of 20% reduction of food waste over the next 10-year period, which is a huge economic value. And then here in the U.S., nationally, we have USDA and EPA jointly with a goal of reducing by 50% by 2030. And by far, food waste is probably the largest driver of what's happening here in the U.S. Another organization called ReFed, which is a national organization, has done a lot of economic data around food rescue and also recapturing the food waste. So when we look at that 50% reduction of food waste by 2030, centralized composting infrastructure. And this is the food scrap part, not the part that you can rescue. there's 13.8 million tons of food scrap annually that can be diverted from landfills, reducing greenhouse gases by almost 5 million tons, also while creating jobs. And as you know, one of the biggest problems that we have here in the U.S. is there is a tremendous amount of a positive media on keeping stuff out of the landfill, but we don't have the infrastructure in place to really handle this amount of food scrap. If you look, some of the other drivers, and again, we are 50 countries inside one country. There's no national organization. EPA does not really have say over composting regulatory responsibilities as far as permitting goes. However, some states have adopted organic landfill bans, keeping food waste out of the landfill. Maryland is just the most recent one you see in these teal states. And if you look at this geographically, where you have high tipping fees, there is definitely more of a push, more of a demand to divert that from landfills. A lot of these states in the Northeast don't even have any more existing landfills. But I will tell you that in the majority of the US, the landfills still rule, just as the fertilizer company rules. So we have to make that connection between those two and try to look at capturing organics and putting it back into the soil. Another thing that's really driving it is packaging. As you know, in the US, this past year or two, a lot of backlash on single-use plastic, a lot of backlash on plastic in general. In the US, we only recycle less than 5% of our plastic waste. So there's a big emphasis on brand companies looking at alternatives from plastic packaging, and obviously compostables play a big part. If you look at this map, it shows that there's about 267 total bills in different states regarding packaging. And some of this has a lot to do with banning single-use plastic. A lot of it has to do with food packaging, and a lot of it has to do with compostables too. So we don't want to make sure that the infrastructure is there in place to take these, the compostables along with the food scrap, and obviously don't want to see it being greenwashed. We want to see it going to composting facilities. As I mentioned earlier, the consumer is really demanding a lot more of cradle-to-cradle products. They do not want to see single-use plastic. And I will say that future generations have been a real driver in this. For those other organizations, I'd strongly suggest that you create a young professionals program because they have been one of the biggest drivers in our industry, or really over the past 5 years. Corporations are also driving this too as well. You're seeing shareholders demanding that the companies have a sustainability manager in place, that they reduce waste overall, because after all, reducing waste, you're reducing the amount of waste for your company. You're saving dollars by doing so. And most shareholders won't invest in certain companies unless they know specifically that they have a policy in place for sustainability. The other thing that is driving is high quality compost product. I could tell you that over the past 2 years, with COVID being in place, we have had our members report record sales. We thought last year was a record year. Well, this year, people are reporting they're 30% above and running out of compost. So if you can produce a high quality compost product in the US, it definitely will sell, and you get a lot of repeat sales out of it. Where is that all going? Well, in some states where you have ag states like California, a lot of it goes into organic agriculture. Where you have high urban areas, we're seeing a lot of it going into green infrastructure for stormwater management in the form of bioretention basins, green roofs, and so forth. So that is a big driver. So what are some of the hurdles that for growing infrastructure here in the US? A lot of these are similar with what Susan talked about in Canada, as well as what Peter talked about in Australia. A lack of public education and outreach, I think, on a national level on why we need to compost our organics and why compost is important to be used on your property, on your landscape, on your farm. And then I think we need a clearer understanding of at the bin. What do people do at the bin? We need to reduce contamination, and we can only do that by getting people to understand that source separation is going to give you a higher quality product, whether it be a recyclable product or whether it be a compost product. Very much in the US, the United States is mainly started out as a yard trimmings composting, and back in the late 80s, early 90s. And it still maintainedly is. We only really take about 5% of the food waste that's mixed with yard trimmings or green waste, as you call it in your country, some of your other countries. But we definitely have the potential to convert some of these yard waste facilities over into to be able to handle source separated organics. And then biosolids. The numbers that you saw that Jane presented in the US are mainly yard waste numbers. There is some biosolid numbers in there as well, but it's only a small portion of that is food waste. And in some states, we still even have where there is you can landfill yard waste, which is kind of insane, but that's the way it works. There's a lot of different states and a lot of different political areas that in this country where we have no organics bans and we have no yard waste bans. Zoning has been a big issue, siting facilities. And a lot of this has to do with where is the land available in particularly in urban areas, not so much in agricultural areas. We're seeing a lot more on the farm composting and a lot more initiatives from both USDA and NRCS to encourage more on the farm composting. A lot of this is more around urban and rural areas of the country. Contamination, as we mentioned earlier, is a huge issue, from a standpoint of identification of compostables versus non-compostables. So again, I think at the bin where you're making that separation, where we're making the collection is really important. We know that compostable products will break down in compostable facilities if done properly. However, there's still this identification issue that we need to go over. And then also banning some of these other single-use plastics and styrofoams and labels that are not compostable on things like fruit. The other sources of contamination that we're facing is obviously the PFAS issue that we're experiencing, and then also persistent herbicides, which are more chemically based contamination, and we're trying to overcome these obstacles as well. Financing has been extremely hard to get. However, there is a lot more interest over recent years that I have fielded, seeing venture capitalists and more investment in our industry. We are a fragmented industry. There is very little state and national economic data available, mainly what EPA or BioCycle collects. Some states do not even track the amount of compost that's produced. There is no federal funding for composting, or has been really since maybe the early 80s when it was first, a lot of this first EPA funding that we've gotten. And then we have a thing called North American Industry Classification Code. And that really, we're trying to get our own code right now. The composting industry is lumped in as a fertilizer mixing operation, and we need to get our own freestanding North American Industry Classification Code, which we filed for last year. Hopefully we'll get that this year. How do we overcome these hurdles? A lot of it is just developing a roadmap to success and really providing model rules, model legislation for states to adopt, and really going state by state with these and try to get these introduced through our state chapter system. and through our network of partnerships. A lot of this starts with what we call target organics. And most of the solid waste plans in the US happen on the county or municipal level. And composting needs to be part of that solid waste plan right from the beginning. These plans are usually 10-year plans. And if we don't carve out a space at that point, then we're lost for a good 5 to 10 years. And a lot of this has to do with, again, policy and making sure that there's both county and state policy to increase recycling rates and increasing keeping organics out of the landfill. So the Target Organics project, this past year, we've concentrated on the model zoning. We hope to have a model zoning template out for municipalities to adopt sometime this fall. And then we are in the process of also updating our template for model rules and regulations for states to adopt. This initially came out in 2012 and is in the process of getting updated through a stakeholder process. We have worked with BPI on some model labeling and identification for compostable products. We'd like to see that going even further and look at recommending to states how that should be handled. So we have more of a uniform policy on what is considered compostable and what is not. And then also we just got done with a compost use return on investment, and this has to do with putting economic value on compost. And a lot of it is around the agricultural and horticultural benefits of compost for in the soil. And then this coming year, we are going to launch Compost University, which will be a online learning management system for the very basic level interest of compost all the way up to the professional operator of composting. And next year, we'll be working on a model organics recycling legislation for states to adopt. And then a how-to guide for municipalities. How do we get municipalities, again, to put composting into their solid waste plans? And we'll have a website called the Target Organics Hub that will be out in July of this year. We have embarked in an industry economic study. I want to thank Peter for providing me with his information on his study. That has done a great job for us, and we're going to launch that next month. It'll probably take us a year to do so. And then some of the other things that we're working on around compost marketing. And then year 3, again, we want that national education program. We think that's the best. Last year, we formed a corporate leadership council, and mainly to involve brand companies to support us on infrastructure growth in the US. And this has been highly successful. After 1 year, we were able to generate over $50,000 to help us on those deliverables that I just talked about. And brand companies are welcome to join to really help us on source separation of organics, shaping that consumer behavior at the bin, and also mainstreaming composting by encouraging municipalities to invest in programs, and then also supporting us on our model policies to increase infrastructure growth. And then this
Frank, can I give you 1 minute?
Yes, sure. I'm almost wrapping up now. So this past International Compost Awareness Week, we launched an infrastructure coalition, which is made up with various association stakeholders to try to get federal funding for compost infrastructure here in the US. This is a first of its kind. And I think I'm happy to report that we're very close to seeing a bill get introduced into Congress. Hopefully in the next week. We are down to the fine tuning of the word smithing. And I think that'll be something that I'll definitely circulate out to all the other organizations. Just want to thank you again for letting me speak.
Well, thanks, Frank, and I'm sorry to chase you along. I'm a very bad chair. I should have kept everybody to their time, but you've all got such interesting presentations, and compost is my love, my first industrial love, and I want to hear everything you want to say. Frank, just one quick question from me. Is the tendency to go towards more or less restrictive waste policies a political question? You know, will we see democratic states going one way and Republican states going the other, or is it a question of population and landfill costs rather than politics?
It's a little of both. I don't think, I mean, we have parts of the country where it costs $15 a ton to landfill something. They're not, it's
Wow.
definitely economics that's driving it. So, and then having those bans in place, I think is another thing. But where you have high landfill tipping fees, there's definitely an incentive for municipalities to look at composting because of that. The heaviest portion, as you know, the mixed solid waste is compostable, and if they're up to 35% if they can convert that. And that's why New York City is really pushing composting too as well. And you'll see it in some of the other areas, some of the other cities like Seattle and Portland, where there is high tipping fees.
Thank you very much, Frank, and please share your slides with us afterwards. Coming to the last two presentations. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please be patient with us. I know we're running a bit late, but there are two very, very good speakers and very good presentations to come now from the United Kingdom, where we have Jenny Grant, who is Head of Organics at RIA, and then after her, Alberto Confalinieri from Italy. Jenny, the floor is yours. Lots of exciting policy things going on to tell us about here in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, thanks, David. Can you see my presentation? Okay, you can, brilliant. And apologies in advance. I have a dog here who was very well amused at the start of this webinar, but less so now. So if there's any background noise, apologies. Thanks very much for inviting me to be part of it. It's really great to hear what all those other countries are doing. And, Jane starting off with telling us what wonderful stuff compost is. Not that we need convincing, but it's really great to have that data that we can use. So today I just very briefly, and I will try and be brief, want to give you an overview of what's happening in the UK at the moment. And as David said, we're definitely in a period of change with regard to government policy, consulting on a number of major reforms. So I'm just going to sort of rattle through those as well. So just briefly, I work for the Association for Renewable Energy and Clean Technology. We're a not-for-profit trade association in the UK, and we work across many different sectors that are set out here. Particularly, I head up the Organics Forum, and the Organics Forum is where we represent composting and AD operators, also people who do various organics recycling to land, and we promote the use of biologically treated materials. So sort of where are we now in the UK? In terms of food waste, the estimate is there's about 9.5 million tonnes of food waste, majority of which, 6.6 million tonnes, is from households. Unfortunately, quite a lot of that is still edible. We have done a lot over the past few years, so obviously we support lots of work to do waste reduction and reuse and redistribution, and we've actually seen an 18% reduction in food waste since 2007, and there's ongoing work and campaigns looking at that as well. But inevitably there is some inedible food waste, and at the moment we're recycling about 2.2 million tonnes of that through composting and AD. And in terms of garden waste, we've got 3.39 million tonnes that are going to composting. In terms of the number of sites, we have a real mix. In terms of composting sites, we've got about 308 composting sites across all 4 nations of the UK. The vast majority of those are processing garden waste, but we do have 46 sites that are approved to take food waste with different technology. And they're doing a great job. They're processing about 6 million tonnes in total of bio-waste. Like other countries, we've also got a lot of anaerobic digestion happening, both in the waste sector and dealing with farm waste and more industrial sludges. And we've got a total of 579 plants, 116 of which are taking food waste. And those food waste plants are processing about 2.6 million tonnes of food waste every year. And I probably don't need to spend a long time saying about the brilliant products. I think Jane and Marco have set that out really well. In the UK, we produce nearly 3 million tonnes of compost and about 7.5 million tonnes of digestate. In terms of the compost, vast majority of that goes to agriculture, about 70%, with the remainder split between horticulture and landscaping type applications, and some going into growing media as well. For the digestate, it's almost all used in agriculture. And we've heard today already really well why these are such brilliant products and the benefits that they can bring. And certainly in the UK, I think there's really an opportunity to make sure that those organics are properly recognised. We've got a number of changes to soil health policies. We've got an environmental land management scheme coming in where farmers will be rewarded for maintaining their soil health. And there's a real opportunity to make sure organics is recognised properly. There's also a lot of focus on carbon footprint reduction, and we've heard today the brilliant benefits, carbon sequestration benefits applying compost to soils can bring. And also there's a huge potential for enabling a reduction of our reliance on using peat, and I'll come on to that in a moment. So it's been a busy year so far. There's a lot happening. We have a resources and waste strategy out from government, and they are proposing to bring in mandatory weekly food waste collections from all households and businesses starting from 2023, and that's in England, and mandatory garden waste collections as well, with the potential that garden and food waste could be collected together. So huge potential to get some more of that food waste out of the residual waste stream and into organics recycling. Also yesterday announced was the England's peat action plan, and there's various proposals in there about banning the sale of peat products for general use and also looking at phasing out the use of peat in horticulture. So there's a real opportunity for us to supply high quality, consistent composted food and garden waste products into these sectors, where they're suitable replacements. Most of that is sort of England focused, and obviously the UK has other nations as well, and they all have quite different policies on waste and how they deal with it. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland already do have regulations that require separate food waste collections. They also have circular economy strategies with recycling targets in there, 70% by 2025 recycling target for Scotland and Wales, and food waste reduction targets as well, so reducing the amount of food waste that we're producing in total. I think all this time, it really gives us, it's a really good opportunity for us to make sure we get things right, to make sure that we're able to realise all these brilliant benefits of applying organics to land. The introduction of mandatory food waste collections from households and business will mean that there's more feedstocks coming into plants, which will enable investment for new facilities to make sure we're able to deal with those increased volumes. And it also represents an opportunity for a more consistent approach across the country. Make sure that we're able to better communicate and educate the householders so that they know what goes in the bin. And I know Italy have done some great work on that in the past, and I've got some brilliant things that we can learn from. We want to make it as easy as possible for people to understand what they need to do so that they're going to put the right material in the right bin. I think Susan said that was a challenge they've been facing as well, and it's clearly something worldwide. obviously, the better educated and informed people are, and the more they know what to do, hopefully that will realise an improvement in the quality of materials that our member sites are taking in. There's been a lot of focus on that in the UK over the past few years, and actually our regulators are going to put a limit on what contamination sites are actually able to accept in to try and force that improvement. And also not only improving what goes into composting and anaerobic digestion sites, but also what comes out, the quality of compost and digestate. And there's a lot of scrutiny on that as well, mostly in terms of the plastics content in there. And in Scotland, we have a very tight plastics limit for compost and digestate. I think it's actually the tightest in the world, which was really driven by increased scrutiny from the end users of these materials, and it was driven by the market demand for those products to be improved. So real opportunity to make sure everything hangs together and stacks up nicely, and we can produce really good quality materials. Other people have mentioned about compostables. Obviously, the use of compostable materials, bags and liners, represents an opportunity to make sure that we're reducing the chance of any non-compostable plastics coming into site. I think it also gives an opportunity to do more integration of anaerobic digestion and composting, which traditionally isn't something we have a lot of in the UK on the same sites, and I know other countries do. But if we were in the position where we had food waste and compostable liners, and then food waste can be treated through anaerobic digestion, and the compostable liners then ultimately end up in the composting side of the site, that would work well together. So I think there's lots of potential to make sure we get the system right. I think also we need to be mindful of novel technologies. I've seen quite a lot of interesting reports over the last few years looking at different ways of extracting nutrients from food waste. So further extraction of high quality proteins from food waste. There's been some work done looking at insect farming, mealworms, black soldier fly, that sort of thing, producing protein, and then the byproducts from that ultimately coming in to the organics recycling process and used as fertilizer. So it is an exciting time in the UK. I hope we can learn from some of the other countries that we've heard from today. And we're obviously all facing similar challenges. I'm sure we can learn from each other and make good progress. I'll leave it there as we're very short of time. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of it. It's been great, and I'm very happy to share my slides. Thanks, David.
Well, thank you, Jenny. Thanks for taking part. And as somebody who, as you know, has been doing this for a long time, we always looked to the UK many years ago as in Europe as being at the forefront with the very big garden.
Has anyone else lost David? I have.
Maybe I.
Or is it me?
Maybe I froze. Did I freeze? I froze.
I can hear you, David.
Oh, maybe it's Jenny then. Okay, all right, good. Well, it's Jenny who's frozen, not me. I was saying that we used to look to the UK for the very big garden waste in the composting industry that it had. It's remained a big garden waste in composting industry, but the food waste has yet to come. But that's around the corner, and it's on its way. And to see how we do food waste, last but certainly not least, is Alberto Confalonieri, who is the technical director at the Italian Compost and Biogas Association, where, as I said before, half of all the food waste in the EU, including the UK, is currently collected and treated in Italy. They've been doing it for 20 odd years. And so, Alberto, please tell us how you do it, because getting the food waste right is critical to the industry, but it's also critical to overall resource management. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Good morning, everybody. First of all, please tell me if you correctly see my presentation that I have.
Yeah, but we can see on it's okay. It's split, so we can see the.
It's not a problem. We can
see the first and the next slide.
Okay, if you don't mind, I will keep this type of presentation. Okay. Just to save some time. Thanks again, David. I will try to run a bit, even though not being a mother tongue doesn't help me a lot, but I'll try to run. As you said, I'm Alberto Confalonieri, speaking from the Italian Composting and Biogas Association, which is the main and only association Italian association which tries to push forward the bio-waste recycling sector, going from enhancing the separate collection of bio-waste to the recycling, to improving the recycling industry, to helping the correct application and exploitation of the outputs deriving from the recycling of bio-waste. Most of the Italian industry recycling bio-waste is associated to CIC. Over 75% of the operators are our associates. I prepared for you some snapshots about the bio-waste sector. The first snapshot is about separate collection, so the uptaking of the feedstocks of our recycling plants. As you can see, the separate collection of bio-waste has been running a lot over the time. You see that year by year, we are increasing the amount of separately collected bio-waste. We have come to over 80% of the population involved in the separate collection of bio-waste, which means that more than 7 million tons or 120 kilograms per inhabitant per year of bio-waste are separately collected. 80% are food waste and 20% are represented by garden waste. And we have a target, a reasonable target of arriving at over 9 million tons of bio-waste collected until the next 4 years. Very quickly, the main drivers for this rapidly evolving situation. There are many reasons, but I've summed up here the three main ones. First of all, we have been the first member states that have introduced targets for separate collection in according to our law, up to a minimum of 65% of separately collected municipal solid waste should have been achieved until 2018. And in parallel, we enforced the landfill directive, the European landfill directive, which introduced binding targets of biodegradable waste to be diverted from landfill and has increased the costs for landfilling waste. And for the future, the enforcement of the circular economy package will furtherly foster the separate collection and recycling of municipal waste and bio-waste in particular, because of its targets of recycling, 65% recycling targets until 2035, the obligation of introducing in all member states until 2023 of organic waste separate collection that in Italy has been anticipated at the end of this year. And so all these regulatory instruments have helped us to be one of the most performant countries in Europe as well, at least. From separate collection to the recycling sector, we are a country that has traditionally relied on composting facilities for the recycling, for turning our bio-waste in compost. As you can see from the early 19th, we have been running composting facilities. And at the beginning of this century, anaerobic digestion has been introduced, pushed forward by the economic instruments that try to push forward the production of electric energy from renewable sources. So you can see that from the early 2000s, anaerobic digestion recycling pathways have been raising in Italy. And this is the representation of today's situation, in which of the almost 350 facilities which treat bio-waste in Italy, 280 are composting facilities, and only 65 are anaerobic digestion integrated with composting facilities. But in terms of amounts of waste treated, the two pathways have a 50% share of waste treated. So, and in particular, food waste is predominantly treated in anaerobic digestion facilities. Just a quick slide to share with you the latest frontier of the anaerobic digestion, that will probably further improve and increase the amount of waste treated with the integration of an anaerobic digestion step. That is represented by the upgrading of biogas to biomethane. So far, since 2017, we have 12 plants in operation that are able to produce over 100 million cubic meters of biomethane per year. And we have a reasonable target of doubling this amount until the next few years. But let's come back to the focus, the subject of this webinar. Irrespectively of the pathway for the recycling, in Italy, the one and only end of waste for bio-waste recycling is compost. Here you can see the numbers of compost produced in Italy, over 2,100,000 tons of compost produced, which in terms of organic carbon return to the soil means over 430,000 tons per year. And you can see even the thousands of nutrients which are containing compost and return to soil as well. Compost in Italy is mainly categorized in two types, depending on the feedstocks utilized for its production. The vast majority of compost is bio-waste compost, so the one produced from feedstocks, including food waste, sludges, and so on, while 30% of the compost is green compost, so the compost produced by garden waste only. The two types of compost are natural substitute replacers of peat in case of the green waste compost, and of manure in the case of compost produced from food waste, so the bio-waste compost. One of the barriers for the spreading of compost applications in Italy is represented by the confidence by the farmers, by the final utilizers with respect to a product which is generated by waste. For this reason, our association CIC has implemented since the beginning of the century a label, a program for assessing, monitoring, and giving guarantees on the quality of the compost produced by its associates. It's a voluntary program. Over 55% of the compost produced in Italy have stick to the Italian quality compost program promoted by CIC, which means that roughly 40% of the compost produced in Italy is a CIC monitored compost, and this has increased the confidence by farmers in the utilization of this product. About the market share, we periodically survey the companies which have stick to the compost quality program, and we ask them information about the market, the outlooks of the market, but I share with you just this slide, which represent the market share of the final utilization of compost. Over 75% of the compost is destined to field scale crops, so to open agriculture, but even horticulture as an interesting represent an interesting share of the market, while the other application, above all applications related to pots or gardening sector, are present in the market. So we have an interesting diversification of the market for compost. And here you are our outlook for the future in 4 bullets. First of all, of course there will be an increase in the amounts of soil improvers, so compost and other soil improvers derived from waste recycling, because of the future increase of the separate collection of bio-waste. There will be likely a diversification of the products. This is because the recently approved European regulation on fertilizer will give the possibility of certain types of digestate to be end of waste, and so to be available on the market in the near future. There will be an improvement in the compost and digestate quality because of the more stringent limits that will be set by the regulation that the European regulation on fertilizer that I will mention to you. And there we are seeing an interesting output diversification, because besides compost and biogas and biomethane, which are the main outputs that so far are being produced by our industry, the CO2 deriving from the refining of the off-gas is a further output that it's raising consumption in Italy, and then the nitrogen derived from the liquid digestate, and then the volatile fatty acids deriving from the anaerobic digestion will be bricks for the green chemistry, and so on and so forth. So there is an interesting future for us. Last but not the least, David, if I have 30 seconds more, last slide that I have added.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, few minutes ago, because of a question that you asked to Marco, if I'm not wrong. We have made available for our associates a tool that we have called CO2 Compost, which is a tool for measuring the carbon footprint of each of our plants. So through this tool, every plant is able to measure the overall footprint, balancing the costs for collecting, for treating, for recycling, and for applying compost, and the benefits derived from the savings of methane in the landfill, from the production of renewable energy, electricity, or biomethane, from the utilization of compost also for the replacing of mineral fertilizer. Every plant is able since 1 year to modeling the benefits of making any improvements in their layouts. And we have made an overall calculation for the Italian the Italian situation. We have estimated that so far every year we can offset roughly 4,300,000 tons of CO2 equivalents from the collection, treatment, and utilization of the products derived from bio-waste recycling. So I've ended my presentation, David.
Thank you.
Of course, I've not faced all the topics related to bio-waste recycling, but if you ask me.
No, there's one question, Alberto, I have for you, and that is, you say that 40% of the compost produced in Italy is certified by you, but the other 60% is still made to the same government regulation quality.
Yes, yes,
It's not that it's an inferior quality, it's just that you don't certify it.
yes, we don't certify because the CHIC label is a voluntary certification, is above all something that should increase your appeal for the market, but 100% of the compost must stick to the Italian regulation on fertilizer.
The same criteria, the same
criteria. The difference is that the products which are under our label are monitored by an independent entity, which is CHIC, which collects waste according to specifications that make all the samplings very representative, and the samples are analyzed by laboratories which are independent and which are approved by the Ministry of Agriculture.
Yes, now this is often a question of confusion because, for example, in the United Kingdom, we have the voluntary standard, which we call PAS 100.
Yes.
But it's less than half of compost plants have that standard. But actually, the other half very often don't meet it.
Okay.
So, but in Italy, you may be certified by CHIC or you may not, but you still have to follow the same legal standard.
Of course, David.
Okay.
Of course.
All right. Thank you for that. Can I ask all of the speakers, please, to come back on the screen? Those of you who have remained. Alberto, if you could stop screen sharing there and all of us come back. We have run for 2 hours, so I think that our audience is probably a little tired. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to say to you all, thank you very much, and to ask you if you have any specific questions that you want to ask any of the other speakers before we sign off. Is there any specific question that any of you wants to ask each other? Jane.
Just very quickly, do you think this is the start of a global compost alliance?
Well, I would very much hope so, and that depends on you, doesn't it? Because you and the compost associations have to decide that. One of the problems I always found with the compost industry was that because of the very nature of organics collection and using compost, it's a very, very localized industry. And so somebody sitting in Montana or somebody sitting in Canberra, it's very difficult to understand the value of being part of an international organization. Whereas if you're selling oil or gas, it goes everywhere across the world. If you're selling compost, it goes 10 miles away.
Which I could say there, David, that the issues we all face are the same the world over. It's contamination, it's ineffective or improper regulation and enforcement, and the benefits are the same the world over. The markets are clearly differ, the compost clearly differs, but the benefits are the same the world over. So I think there are huge commonalities there between us.
Could I also suggest a couple of other commonalities? I think most of us have industries that are at the start of, if not well into, a boom. And that boom, if we manage it well, should last for a decade. The second thing is we represent an industry that, let me put it this way, we're the white hats in a greater waste and recycling milieu where there's a lot of black hats. We're the ones who do what it says on the box. We deliver to our promises, and we deliver what is a true circular economy process. So the more we share resources and data to support those arguments, the better for all of us and for our members.
I would agree with Peter, and I think we could start with just a real simple MOU of sharing of documents and reciprocating on our conferences and stuff like that, membership. I've certainly connected with a lot of the news feeds that are coming out of some of the other organizations. So I think it's a great idea.
To give an example, Frank gave us access, our members access to the brilliant work done by USCC around persistent herbicides over many years. And that's invaluable for us in the arguments we're putting to government here about banning those products. We couldn't, given the size of our organisation, possibly replicate that work in anything like the sort of detail that Frank and his group have done. And having access to that is like gold for us.
And I would echo, what Peter did on the economic study. Like I said earlier, We took that and we're going to try to model as much as we can after that. Then we were actually ready to go ahead and let an agreement to get that done. And then we stopped it and said, okay, make sure we include everything that's in here because we want both the economic and the environmental, not just the environmental.
Well, most of us have got a common language, and I know Alberto's English is perfect as well. Even though the documents may be in Italian, we can speak to each other. I mean, maybe offline without the audience here, we could all reconnect in the next few days and discuss this together and how we can organize it, and who else we can bring in as well from other composting associations around the world that are not currently included in the network we have created. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been 2 hours together talking about composting, talking about carbon and soil sequestration. Thank you to Ecomondo for hosting this webinar. Ecomondo is one of the largest world's environmental trade fairs. It takes place in Rimini at the end of October this year. I've been going there for 22 years. I really, really recommend you go there. 100,000 people go through. And it handles everything from waste to energy to transport to water. And pandemic permitting, at the end of October, we will all be there, or many of us will be there to talk about a lot of these issues. It's not just a great place to do business, it's also a great place to meet. Thank you to Ecomondo. Hope to see you there at the end of October. And with the speakers, let's try and connect again in the next few days. And with you, the audience, thank you for listening to us.
Good, David. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Bye,
David.
Jane.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.